A new report concludes that it will take 3 years for the U.S. military to replace key weapons it has used in 3 months of war against Iran. Now, according to an analysis by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the Pentagon faces long replacement times for the most advanced weapons used in strikes against Iran, such as the Tomahawk and Patriot missiles. And this despite planned increases in defense spending. It has raised eyebrows among members of Congress. Take a listen to this exchange between U.S. lawmakers on the House Committee on Appropriations and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the U.S. Defense Secretary.
General Kane, the depleted munitions have been a subject of some of the discussions that you've even heard here today. With respect to stockpiles that we have around the world, key regions like the Indo-Pacific and the Middle East, can you give us an update? What are you hearing from the combatant commands about their munitions status around the world?
Well, sir, we have sufficient munitions for what we're tasked to do right now.
I take issue with the characterization that munitions are depleted in a public forum. That's not true. And ultimately, we have all the munitions needed to execute what we need to execute, and we're going to ensure that we supercharge that going into the future.
And joining me now is Kelly Grieco. She's a U.S. foreign policy analyst with the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C. She's also an adjunct professor at Georgetown University's Center for Security Studies. Kelly, it's good to have you on the program. We just heard from the Defense Secretary and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying that they have enough weapons at the moment. Yet this new CSIS report finds that it will take 3 years to replenish weapons that have been used in Iran. So what's the deal? Are weapons stockpiles at an acceptable level, or are they too low?
Yes, well, thank you for having me. And I think you'll notice that the words coming from the administration, and like in the clip you played, are very careful about saying they have what they need right now. And that's the key word. So, the United States, if it were to continue this war, still has things it can use to fight this war, and including even in air and missile defense, which is an area we're under stress. The problem, though, is that when every missile or interceptor you're using today to buy down risk in this theater is creating years of strategic risk because it's not available in other contingencies, whether it's the Indo-Pacific or, say, to send to Ukraine. And so, yes, does the United States have what it needs today? Sure. But will it have what it needs tomorrow in another war?
Yeah, this new report says that it will take years to replace stockpiles of key missiles. And isn't that the most powerful reason for the Pentagon to keep massive stockpiles of weapons? I mean, if productivity, capacity at the moment is weak, wouldn't it be catastrophically weak if the U.S. were to find itself in a war, say, with China?
Oh, absolutely. And in fairness, this is a problem that has been recognized for years now. And certainly the Ukraine war, I think, brought this home for many people when we realized the challenge about even being able to supply Ukraine sufficiently with things like Patriot interceptors. So there's been an effort starting with the Biden administration and continued by this administration, the Trump administration, even before the Iran war, to try to ramp up the production on key munitions that we're likely to need, say, in a conflict with China. The challenge, though, is that you can't ramp this up overnight. And there are many bottlenecks in this process, including that you rely on, say, critical minerals, for example, from China itself. So we're trying to ramp up production, but it's something that can't happen overnight, and it's taking years. And so we're digging ourselves, if you will, a bigger hole right now in the Middle East by using up some of these munitions. And at a time when we were already trying to expand from what we
Kelly, can you explain maybe to our viewers, how can the United States, the world's sole military superpower, not be in a position to quickly replace these important weapons? I mean, how is that possible?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of reasons here. One is that it's been a long time since the United States has had to fight a war of attrition in this way, or prepare to fight a war of attrition. This has really not been the case since the Cold War. And so, when the Cold War ended, a lot of, the defense industry consolidated and these production facilities went away. We didn't need them. And we invested more in our technological advantage over other adversaries. rather than really relying on quantity. We decided quality had a quantity all its own. But that approach can only get you so far, particularly as we're starting to see other adversaries achieve quality parity or coming close to that. Then quantity starts to become very important again. And as you're trying to ramp up this production, there are a couple key things that you just can't change overnight. One is that these are sophisticated weapons, including the munitions, and you need skilled labor for that. It takes time to train people. The second is that what we discover is there's often these bottlenecks in the process. For example, there might be just one mom and pop shop that makes a particular subcomponent for a very important missile, and then that slows down the whole production. And then the third piece is what I mentioned earlier, which is the critical minerals that are coming from China.
Yeah.
So getting this all in place and having it run smoothly takes time, and there are places where it can go wrong.
I understand that maintaining large stockpiles of weapons comes with a huge price tag. I mean, why are maintenance and storage, according to what the Pentagon tells us, so prohibitively expensive?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's remarkable to think that the United States is looking at a $1.5 trillion defense budget, yet doesn't have enough of anything, right? Like how could they have a shortage? And some of this, I think we have to be honest, is about procurement choices. That the United States, if you look at the services, they tend to really prioritize new weapon systems. So things like, the F-47, a sixth generation aircraft, or new submarines. And it tends to be over time, what we've seen is they prioritize those systems that take many years to develop. And then when they have to make cuts or choices in their budgets, they're very quick to cut the munitions and to go short on the munitions. And so they've been running risks that way, and they're now paying the price for it.
Wow.
And so some of this is just bad choices in terms of movement.
Let me ask you about the China and Taiwan question. Has the Iran war opened a window of opportunity for China to act if it wants to exploit U.S. military vulnerability?
Yeah, I think they're against, to some extent, deterrence in the Indo-Pacific. But I think that it's a step too far to say, therefore, that China now has a window to take military action against Taiwan, in part because China has its own timeline. And it also has to think about whether it's militarily capable of conducting this kind of mission, which would be extraordinarily challenging, whether it's a blockade or it's an invasion itself, say, of Taiwan. And that is going to be a challenge regardless of this munitions issue for the United States. But certainly in the coming years, as China continues to modernize and improve its military, and the United States is struggling to replenish these munition stockpiles, this could become more challenging.
Let me take it back to the conflict in Ukraine. Ukraine on Wednesday announced that it had asked the U.S. for more American-made air defense ammunition to counter intensifying Russian ballistic missile attacks. We know what we've just seen in the last 7 days. I mean, is it likely to get what it needs?
Sadly, no. In some sense, I don't think Ukraine, from its perspective, has ever received what it thinks it needs in terms of air and missile defense. And understandably, its cities are under siege. The United States is under extraordinary stress on the Patriot system, the interceptors that Ukraine wants. And I would just say that it's not, we've used over 1,000 of these interceptors in the current conflict. That's an extraordinary amount. But we also, other partners in the region have also, expended these kinds of interceptors, our Gulf partners, and they're all clamoring to have more, to replenish those stockpiles. And then you add to that list Ukraine asking for more. There's just simply not enough to go around. And these are really challenging political decisions, frankly, to make about who's going to have priority on that. And I will just say that I think Ukraine is probably going to find it's not the first on that list.
Well, could Ukraine shop around? I mean, can it go anywhere else to fill its air defense gap, or is it completely dependent on the U.S. stepping up?
Yeah, so right now, the systems that it has are largely American systems, particularly these high-end Patriot systems. What we've seen in the past, though, is that other countries, European allies, for example, also have Patriot systems, and they've provided some of their interceptors. For example, Germany has been quite generous in providing Patriot interceptors to Ukraine. But one of the things that in the last couple of months, Germany, for example, has said is that they've gone as far as they can in providing those interceptors without endangering their own security. So they've asked other European allies to step up there. But countries, are really facing some hard limits, including even in Europe, around what they can provide to Ukraine. Are there other systems potentially that Ukraine could use for ballistic missile defense, like Korean systems? Yes. But the question would be whether, for example, the South Koreans are willing to sell those systems to Ukraine and how quickly they could get there.
And if we take this back to the Middle East for a moment, what does the situation mean for U.S. allies there? Iran just carried out strikes against Kuwait.
Yeah, so if you are a Gulf state in particular, looking at this moment of the ceasefire, where it seems like we are at an agreement potentially, or very, very close, but the ceasefire is also under enormous stress with this tit-for-tat exchange. You have to be very concerned about a resumption of this war because you have largely expended, your missile interceptors in the first part of this war. Your stockpiles are under enormous stress. You're not sure when they're going to be backfilled by the United States. And if this does result in round two, particularly because Iran was able to dig out many of its ballistic missile launchers and missiles, you're going to be under enormous stress, but you're not going to be in the same position you were at the beginning to intercept those things, which means more Iranian missiles will leak through and it will result in significantly more damage to your country.
Okay, let me ask you before we run out of time, this overburdened capacity for the U.S. military, is it teaching Europe a lesson, forcing Europe to become more self-reliant when it comes to defense?
I've been making this argument for many years, and I've even been encouraging the Europeans that they should buy European more on, on defense. I would say, there's some evidence, to be honest, in that we ask Europe often to spend more on defense, and then we say, oh, and also, by the way, please buy American weapons. Because it's good for our defense industry. What I think we're seeing and that Europe is learning is that there are risks in relying so heavily on American defense industry because we may not be able to supply all of our allies, and then we have to make choices. And so you're starting to see the conversation start with European defense industry. And frankly, that is good for American interests as well.
Kelly Grieco, always good to get your insights and your analysis. Kelly, thank you.
Thank you.